looking back on this thing, do you believe the jurors got it wrong? Because the jurors, they believed you.
Well, part of it, remember, I was one of many witnesses, and there were many scientific witnesses.
Correct.
There was a lot of new DNA that came into it. I think I testified and gave the same opinion from the cause of death in the criminal trial and in the civil trial. Remember, after he was found not guilty, then the family had a criminal trial, a civil trial, and I said the same thing, and that jury found that O.J. was guilty. But I think that this goes to lawyering. I think in the criminal trial, Johnnie Cochran, Barry Scheck, and Peter Neufeld from the Innocence Project, and a couple of other lawyers presented the defense much better than the prosecution did. I think that, especially Johnnie Cochran, that the jury loved him and loved the Peter and Barry Scheck, and they found, and because when it's hard to read a juror's mind, the jury is there and they hear a lot of conflicting evidence, and they decide not only who the witness is. I'm saying certain things, but they're also measuring who the attorneys are, and my opinion is that it was more that the jury decided on not only the witnesses but also on the attorneys in the criminal case in favor of O.J., and that in the civil case, I think the plaintiff lawyers, the lawyers for the civil case, were better than the defense attorneys. I mean, the plaintiffs than the defendants. So on the one hand, my testimony was involved with the criminal decision in favor of O.J., and my same testimony in the defense case, which they found in favor of the Goldman family rather than O.J., against O.J.
You know, there has been rumors and conspiracies around this case, like so many others, as you know, that there was more than one assailant. What does your expertise tell you? Was there only one person stabbing these victims, or could there have been multiple assailants?
Well, yeah, we can't tell from just knife wounds usually whether as easily as we can with gunshot wounds. With gunshot wounds, we could tell how many guns were used. With knife wounds, stab wounds, it's much harder to know how many instruments there are. One can get a lot of information, but there are a lot of similar knives. You can't distinguish specific knives necessarily. And I think with O.J., all of the cut wounds and stab wounds could have come from the same weapon, and could have been one or more people, and we can't say as medical examiners who done it. In fact, Shawn, just to be careful, the medical examiners, we find as the medical examiners who, what, where, when, why, and how somebody is killed. But the who is not who done it. The who is the identity, who the victim is. Part of what we have to do is be careful that we're not issuing a death certificate on the wrong person. So we have to establish identity by friends identifying by DNA, by fingerprints, what happened. We're able to say what happened from the scene, why, not always why, but sometimes we can see if there's excess beatings and all that. It was somebody who knew him. Where is important. One of the first things we do is we see a body at the scene. Is this the places where the death occurred, or was the person transferred there after death? That's where rigor mortis and lividity become very important. And when. The when is what time it happened. And there again, rigor mortis, lividity, the things that happen after death. We don't know who done it. Who done it is not up to us. So what I'm saying with O.J., that we know what happened to him, who was up to the police and the prosecutor. And I could say from where I sit, I think that the defense with Johnnie Cochran did a better job than the prosecution in the criminal case, and the family attorneys in the civil case did a better job than the O.J. defense attorneys did in that case.
Got you.
But otherwise, my opinion as to cause of death, whodunit, is irrelevant.
As we know, that case really tore at the fabric of this country along racial lines. Did you, after testifying on behalf of the defense, did your consulting practice take a hit, or did people respect your findings?
It varies. It varies. Remember, I was then still, when in the O.J. Simpson case, the chief forensic pathologist for the New York State Police.
Mm-hmm.
My relationship was independent. I was allowed, in my contract with the state police, I was able to do private cases that didn't conflict with New York State Police functioning. But there were a lot of state police people who were upset at me for being part of the
I could imagine
prosecution on that case. But that, especially when the verdict came back in favor in the criminal case for O.J. Every time I testify in a case, one side's going to be happy and the other side's not going to be happy with the outcome. If I'm testifying, 90% of the time I testify for prosecutors with my work with the New York City Medical Examiner's Office and with the state police, so that 90% of the time, if my testimony is part of is for the side that wins, for the prosecution, they're very happy, but the defense aren't happy. The other parts, and vice versa. So we're always stepping on toes because we're always either we're helping one side or the other side. But in the past 10 years or so, since I retired from the state police and doing civil regular forensic pathology private work, I do about 50-50 defense and plaintiff, and there's always somebody who's going to be upset. But certainly, I think my involvement in the O.J. case made me better known than I had been before that. But as far as being called for cases, lawyers like to call experts who they think some lawyers will side with their side no matter what. And they know in general that I don't always side with the people who want to hire me. So I don't get as many calls as you think I might have gotten. Many lawyers just want to hire somebody who's going to support them. Like, I'm hiring you, therefore we want you to come out and testify according to my theory of the case. And there's enough people who know that doesn't always work, so they don't want to hire me for me to tell them you got the wrong theory.
Got you. Makes perfect sense. And that's why I asked that question. You also testified at this Phil Spector trial. Phil Spector, as some people may know him, many may not, eccentric producer, well known in the music industry, worked with the Beatles. He has major hits under his belt. He was accused allegedly of shooting Lana Clarkson in the mouth. What was your thoughts on that trial, and what were you called to do specifically?
Yeah, I was called early on in the case by the lawyer for Phil Spector to review the cause of death, go over the material, in determining whether this was a homicide. I was called by the defendant. Spector had already been arrested for this by the defense attorney to review the death to see if there's anything that would be helpful in the findings, because their position was that it was self-inflicted, that the gunshot wound to the mouth was self-inflicted. When I reviewed all of the photographs taken at the autopsy, a lot of photographs were taken. I thought from a autopsy point of view, Dr. Henry Lee was also consulted. He's a criminalist, and we work kind of together in reviewing, in coming into Los Angeles, examining the information, going to the house where this occurred. The autopsy showed a gunshot wound of the mouth, and that is usual. That is usual in self-inflicted suicides, because it's very hard to put a gun in the mouth of somebody who keeps the jaw shut, jaws closed. So the first thing was that I found that the bullet wound itself discharged while the muzzle was inside of the mouth. It didn't go through the teeth. The mouth was open. Also, that there was a fracture of the thumbnail. I've seen a few times when people put guns in their mouth. In order to fire the weapon, it's hard to do it in the normal course with the index finger. When they discharge the weapon, they do it with the thumb on the trigger, the hand on the weapon on the outside, and the thumb on the trigger. And it was fractured. It was broken off, which is typical for other situation I've looked at when there's a discharge of using the thumb against the trigger, and that it was entirely all consistent with the a gun in the mouth that was fired by Lana Clarkson, that she had a lot of alcohol in her and maybe some other things that might have contributed to somebody committing suicide. And it was my and that there was no gunshot debris, no discharge on the outside of the face. It wasn't from a distance. Dr. Lee found other information, other things that, and we discussed the trajectory of the bullet was in the mouth was more consistent with being held and self-discharged, whether from the outside. But that was my finding, and all that this is all consistent with trigger being pulled by Lana Clarkson and was not discharged by somebody who was standing across from her.
Okay, as we know,
who also, Shawn, who didn't get any blood. There was no blood on his or discharge on his clothing, which would have happened if he were up close with the gun in the mouth, because there was discharge of material for blood from the mouth following the discharge of the gun.
understood. Phil Spector, his first trial ended in a mistrial, hung jury.
Yes.
His second trial, he's found guilty, spends the remainder of his days behind bars where he eventually expires. It sounds to me that from your expert opinion, as well as Dr. Henry Lee, her death was more consistent with accidental suicide, if not intentional suicide.
Yeah, Shawn, I think you're absolutely right. I think that both Henry Lee and I had agreed that this was much more typical for self-inflicted injury rather than homicide. But remember, Shawn, there were maybe 40 or other witnesses that I've learned over the, when I first started to testify, I would think, boy, my testimony is critical in this case. Well, it turns out there are many other people who testify, and that may be more critical, that the jury, it all depends on whom the jury, how jury decides. But I think you got it right that Dr. Lee and I both felt and testified that this was self-inflicted and not homicide. And there was a disagreement in the first trial that the juries couldn't arrive at a conclusion. I don't know how many people felt one way or the other, but they couldn't get a unanimous conclusion. It went to a second trial. I didn't testify in the second trial.
Okay, and ultimately in the second trial, he's found guilty.